memoir's been around now for 10 years, and there's been lots of discussions about different lives for it. So it was a radio, not a radio play, it was a book at bedtime on the radio, so it's sort of been adapted for radio, and I've done radio plays before, so that was interesting to hear it in that way. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not it would be a film or a TV series or several TV series. And actually, I had admired James's play Love Song to Lavender Menace, and he had asked me to play the role of the visiting writer in it, which I couldn't do, but it meant that we got to know each other. And we only just really recently realised it was actually during lockdown that we started to have the conversation about maybe doing a play together. It wasn't actually Maggie and me, it was just a collaboration of some kind. And then very quickly it was like, well, we've got Maggie and me there. And so for me, and this has changed so much during the process, because I think the work changes as you do the work and as you collaborate and all of that. For me, there were questions I hadn't answered in the book. So there were things I still didn't really understand about my life or didn't understand about myself. There were things I wanted to understand about how I'd grown as a person since I'd written that book. So, you know, that's where the idea of having two DBs came from. It was like I'm in conversation with myself, which I think we all are all the time. And so I wanted there to be two DBs, and James was like, well, what if we brought Maggie to life? You know, that's who you see on stage. So I think it's taken 4 years probably from the initial discussion to opening night. Do you remember this? We asked the people involved in the process if they could email us what they thought the book was, what the key moments from the book was.
Yeah, I still have those notes. Yeah.
And they sent them through, and it was really interesting. So that everyone was like, the grotto, the Craig, the young consumer quiz, the key people, Mark, Heather, you know. Of course, Mike didn't exist as a character there. He was the person behind the book, you know, making it happen and stuff. So
he's mentioned at the very end.
Very end. He's mentioned at the very, 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 very end. And so that we had that, we were like, okay, so this is what it is for people in terms of moments, but what is the feeling that we want? Because we were like, we established halfway through, we want people to leave the theatre with the same feeling that they have when they finish reading the book, which is, that was hard, but I loved it. It was worth it. I loved it. It was worth it. And so that's kind of what we wanted people to have, a very Scottish experience. I would say, had many misunderstandings about what adaptation actually is, and it's your first adaptation. And so, like,
it was a master's in adaptation. It continues to be.
It continues to be. But like, it's not adaptation. It's such a rubbish word for like a process that, because what you're thinking you're doing is you're sort of, in some senses, you know, taking a thing that already exists and putting it into a different art form. So it's like you're sort of translating it, perhaps, is what people might think that it is. And that's actually not true. It's a new work. It's a new piece of art.
Especially the way that Damian's approached it, which is kind of like really brave. Like, you never just wanted to do a straight scenes from the book on stage, and that the play is about the origin story, like how Damian like confronted his past.
I think we never were interested in that either. And actually, you never ever wanted that. I didn't want that. But, you know, an NTS didn't want that. But also, you know, they had to take a punt on what it was that we wanted to do. So we started off by, initially, we thought it was going to be a two-hander, didn't we? Or a three-hander. What was that? What was happening there?
Yeah, just DB and Maggie.
And then I was like, but what about
DB?
And then it was like, okay, so now it's a three-hander. And it was like, right, and then who else? Is there anybody else that we were like, no. For quite a long time, it was just a three-hander and 3 acts. And then it was 5 acts, and now there are 7 actors, and it's a massive production, and it's all over Scotland and the UK and all the rest of it. So, I mean, it really has grown. But the iterative nature of it, the kind of draft, does get you, there's this sort of like panning for gold in a way. Hoping there is gold, but also where the gaps are, where the double beats are, where, you know, because at one point the script was like, it's 130 pages, and we cut some together, and then I went through with Rosie,
I think it was reading it like 4 hours at one point.
And actually I have no problem cutting, like that's not, I'm actually very brutal about that. I'm not precious about material. It's just like, it's gotta go. But there are certain things about it that for me are the play and that will not go unless they aren't working for some reason. And actually Shuba has really listened, and you have too, because I know that you felt differently about some bits of it. But where I'm just like, no, for this play to be my story, we have to see this moment. We have to see this moment. And actually people have taken a leap of faith in me with that. When I was writing the memoir, one of the people involved in the process said to me, you know, there isn't a big coming out scene. Like, why is it, you know, we feel really missing that. And I was like, you think that that's what happens to people. You think there's a moment where we like go out, we like, you know, we just like photocopy a thing that says I'm gay, hand it to all the people in our lives, and it's done.
No,
you know,
and in the play, like, WeDB comes out several times because that's what happens. Like, we're like, you still choose whether to come out, don't you?
Exactly. It never National Coming Out Day is every day if you can, and sometimes it's not, and that's okay. But the thing that was really important, and this was a thing that I remember sitting in here and I was trying to work it out, and then I remember sitting down and writing it, not getting it right first time, talking about it with you, going back to it and being like, because for me this is a kind of the emotional excavation. It's like I can't write the lines until I've understood the feeling or until I've got through it, and sometimes I write it as a way of understanding it and it's not right, and I'm going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And with DB, the moment is so WeDB comes out to Heather in Brighton, but DB comes out to Heather and says, he comes out and says, I'm ashamed that I didn't tell you sooner. Are you angry with me? I'm upset. I feel bad about that. And so, and that felt like a real breakthrough.
Definitely.
Writing that felt like a real breakthrough.
And then Heather comes out and is like, I didn't have a problem with it, which is also part of the process. As time went on, it was like, Damian, this has to be Damian's voice. It's his book. And like, we were making structures, and like a lot of stuff changed from, it was like a structural exercise of going, right, we've got these 5 acts. This has to be here. And that, it has shifted more than any play I've ever worked on. Yeah, definitely. Because I feel like even at the start of rehearsals, like, it's changed massively, hasn't it? Like,
yeah. It really,
and it's been lovely to watch Damian like grow as a playwright as well. Like,
I think that, you know, we've said all along, it's like it would be so easy and lazy to characterise her as just this one note baddie. You get a laugh, and then how does that go? Where do you go with that character if you start off with she's a baddie? And it's like what you start off with is everybody coming in thinks she's a baddie, and we play with that notion of people and her saying things like, I just want the best for you. I've always wanted the best for you. And her believing that is really fascinating, because it's like, yeah, you might want the best, but you're not giving the best, that you are not being helpful. Section 28, not helpful. Closing the steelworks, not helpful.
But seeing it from her, like the way that we've written it from her perspective, that it is, that she thinks she is being helpful, and then you go, oh yeah, like obviously she didn't think I'm gonna try and ruin people's lives and make the world a nightmare, which is what she really did.
Yeah.
But those kind of good like the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
I never wanted to do this on my own, and I didn't ever want anybody else to do this on their own. TV, actually, not so much. I don't mind, but with the play, it was, because again, I was going into it to do that work for myself emotionally. That was important. So we are, you know, and we have very different processes too, I think, as well. You know, James is much more like, sometimes he'll be like, all these things are thrown out there, and then there'll be a thing there that he'll want to refine and hone in on and get to that, and he'll go into this kind of zone.
Hyperfixation,
where he'll just kind of go, he'll sit there like that, and he's like, and you're talking to him and you realise he's actually not listening, and he's not there, because he's pursuing a thought or a thing.
Yeah, like Damian's so fast, and I'm like, not as fast.
I think you are fast.
Yeah, sometimes, but I do. Sometimes I'm like racing to keep up with.
But I think also though, that's also true though, because I'm living and experiencing, and I'm sometimes more ahead of that.
Yeah.
I know, you know, but whereas I don't have that thing. I'll sometimes be like there'll be a lot of thinking and a lot of like, right, okay. And actually, I'm pretty clear. Like when I've got the thing that I want to do or say, like when I was thinking about like Act 3, when I finally got into thinking, I'm going to write about my mum. I'm going to write about my mum, my older sister who's died, and I'm wanting there to be a conversation about that.
Yeah.
Again, nothing. That's one line in the book.
Like, I feel like that play has been in Damian's head, and this process has been about like taking it out of your head.
I think latterly it has been. Yeah, I think at the beginning I didn't see the full potential for it to be a new thing, a different thing on its own. And I think as that has gone in, I mean, I remember, getting the first draft from you of the bits that you had written, and that was quite a nervous moment, us sending that to each other, because it's like, oh my God, where have I hate it? And actually that didn't happen. But what was really exciting about it was like, oh right, so we can really go wild with this. We can actually really do all these things and say all these things, and and NTS got that first draft and we're just like, we're making this.
Yeah.
This is happening.
Yeah, I think Shuba's amazing that he like went with what was on the page. Like a lot of the stage directions where we want to have all this stuff on the stage, the Bing and like remnants of the Ravenscraig and the grotto, and it was all there. And like when we were writing it, I was like, I don't know if we're gonna get this size of set. And Shuba was amazing to like really go with that, and the whole team, like Kenneth's design is so faithful to what was on the page, and
it really
it's
is.
been a really careful process, and really caring about you, like it's Damian's life, and the whole team going, how do you want your life to look on stage? Like,
they have all the people that he just named are incredible, and there are many, many others. And I hope that people go and look at the website and see the creative team and look at the work that they've done, because it's not like they're just taking a thing and making it real. They're bringing again their reference points and their stories and their understanding of what it was like. And there's one point where there's a Dalek on stage, and I got an email about the Dalek, and it was like, do you want it to be a Dalek from the 1960s or do you want it to be a late 90s Dalek? And I was like, it's a 60s Dalek. It's a play that's full of stuff happens. There's always stuff happening, and and the memoir is packed with incident, but the play has got to communicate some of the incident, the key moments of the memoir, but it's also got this whole other extra layer, which is DB's story of, well, can I find my voice? Can I tell my story? Should I? Am I allowed to? What's the cost of that? What's the impact of that? What's it like being stuck in your past when you want to get back to your present, never mind your future? So there's all that extra stuff to do, because home is such an important part of the story. Because home means so many different things. It was really important to me that we have this scene right at the very beginning with BDB and his mum. So you see this loving moment of home, and that at points nearly disappeared. There was pressure at points to sort of, can we start in Brighton? And it's like, no, actually we need just a moment from the past where we see that things are good and lovely, and there's a loving relationship here, and then we get to Brighton and we see again like a good, happy, loving relationship, which is not something, we've discussed this a lot, we see as queer people on stage. You do not get to see like somebody, your boyfriend bringing you fish fingers and chips.
And I think like excavating that extra layer of DB like revisiting trauma and like the way that we've kind of looked at re-traumatization as a theme in the play, like yeah, that's all additional to the memoir, isn't it? And like watching it, I was struck. I was like, oh, it's kind of like the origin story of Maggie and me in a way, isn't it? Like, and the way it ends with like, starting writing Maggie and me. So
I remember very clearly at the beginning that I remember writing that scene. That scene is a scene that hasn't changed
ever.
It's never really changed. And it's always been the same. And because that's what the story is. It's like you turn the corner, you meet yourself coming back the other way. And how have you changed? How has DB changed through the play? How has WeDB? How have all the characters changed? But then how do people coming to see the play feel differently about their own story at the end of it? And that's the thing that's really special about it, I think, is that it holds this mirror up. I wrote that line, stories are mirrors, and you can see people reflecting, but also the sense that his home life is somehow unreal or unstable because this unresolved trauma, these nightmares, PTSD, and that being the thing that he wants to save. You know, that's what's motivating him, and that's why it's so important and beautiful, I think, at the end, to get back home.
Yeah.
But home is more vivid. The shelves, the objects on the shelves are more vivid. They're even more vivid. They're more real, and there's a sense that they're there together, and that home is unshakable. I think there's some important distinctions to think about before you embark on this kind of work. So the first thing I would say is like, all art is autobiographical because it all comes from your life. So James has made autobiographical plays, right? They're not his life, but they're from his life, and he's you know, where else could they come from, right? But let's be clear about that. The myth of so much art, which is so like cis white privileged art, is that inspiration strikes and it comes from without, and you're simply a vessel for channeling that story. That's bullshit, right? It's all art is autobiographical, and we have to be really clear about that, which means, again, it's your story. But there's a distinction between autobiographical art and memoir, right? So in autobiographical art, you can hide. Wealth is not James, right? James is not wealth. And the me of Maggie and me is me, right? It's me. It's a version of me. It's a character of me. But it is me. And so with fiction or autobiographical drama, you have a veil that you can draw. Whereas when it's memoir, there is no veil, and it is necessary for you to be exposed and vulnerable as part of that process. And you know, that has been lonely for me, that has been scary for me. There is nobody else in this process who has to walk into that theatre and people go, that's him, that's him. There's nobody else who walks out of that theatre into that street and people see them and they say, that's him, he did this, he did that, he did that, which creates this huge imbalance between you and everybody else in the world. Everybody else knows more about you than you know about them. So it's a very curious thing, and it is not self-indulgent. People are like, oh, memoir can be self-indulgent. You know, it does contain the word me, moi, and I, but it's the least self-indulgent thing that I think you can ever do, because you know, it's kind of, you're giving people a gift of saying, here's my story, what's your story? But it's the hardest thing. Writing the memoir, I thought, the time was, you know, it was the hardest thing I'd done. And then I wrote a novel called You'll Be Safe Here, which people were like, oh, it's set in South Africa, it's a story about empire, it's over 100 years, it's so different from your memoir. And I'm like, are you kidding? It's about mothers and sons, it's about abuse and survival, it's about resistance, it's about joy, it's about books. These are the things I'm interested in and will always be interested in. And so but with the novel though, I could hide behind it. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like, people, like, there are scenes that I cut from Maggie and me and dropped into the novel. People just never know, they never question it. Whereas with the memoir, like, there's nowhere for me to hide in this process. There's, you know, there have been days where I have come into this building and I have wished that I could shrink myself to the size of a pea and hide inside a box that is then buried in outside 100 metres below the ground. It is exhausting, but it is also energising, because I've let go of a load of stuff. I've realised so much stuff through this process that I was like, oh my God, I didn't realise. Like, so those big speeches that I'd written recently about shame, that's like putting that, let's put that in the play. And also, I can kind of let go of that. And I'm watching Gary perform it, or Sam perform it. And you know, and it's in a room with all these people, and actually they're not judging me. I'm safe, it's all right. So, you know, I wouldn't recommend it as a form of therapy, but I can say that it is therapeutic. Yeah, for sure, it's therapeutic.
So like telling your own story, knowing that's valid, like knowing that queer stories can be like coming of age, romance, like everything, and horror or whatever, that you have access to that. So yeah, that's the big takeaway for me. Like, queer stories can be anything, it doesn't have to be coming out.
Writing the play has helped me find my voice, reconnect with parts of my voice and find new bits of my voice. And I'm writing a novel just now, and it's really interesting watching how the writing of the novel has changed through the writing of the play. So yeah, I think I want people to come away having laughed a lot and having cried a lot. Laughter through tears is my favourite mixed emotion. That's what Dolly Parton says, and that's the vibe.